Losing because of overleveled cards sucks, right? Well, it's always been a serious issue in Clash Royale, but today I'm going to explain how you can win against higher level players even if you are underleveled. We'll talk about building the perfect deck for Midladder, the exact playstyle you should follow, and the mistakes you need to avoid. And finally, I'll reveal the top 10 cards that work best against overleveled opponents. Let's start! Building your own best deck for Midladder requires two things. First of all, you need to understand the issue with overleveled players. You see, cards are balanced in a certain way to keep things smooth when they are at the same level. But even being one level over or under can make huge interaction differences. For example, a fireball won't normally kill a wizard or musketeer, but if the fireball is one level above, it can one-shot those cards. Therefore, similarly, many card interactions change because of the difference in levels. Now that you've understood the core issue with overleveled cards, you need to build a deck to counter them. But wait, you can't just use any cards in your deck. To counter higher level players, you need to use cards whose interactions don't change too much when they are underleveled. Cards like Inferno Dragon and Inferno Tower are a good example of this. Despite being underleveled, these two cards can easily melt down units with high hit points. Therefore, these cards are much better options to counter tanks as compared to something like Hunter or Minion Horde. You also need to carry Swarms because they really help to counter a majority of mid-ladder cards. Cards like Skeletons and Skeleton Army provide great value. Evolved Skeletons can even 3-crown your opponent sometimes. Don't use the Goblin Gang or Goblins because a zap one level higher would instantly wipe them out. Make sure your deck has a win condition, utility spells, and splash damage units. A fast win condition is preferred, while spells, which can provide an instant impact, are a must-have in your deck. To make things easier for you, later on in this video I'll be revealing the top 10 cards to use if you are underleveled. But just building a good deck isn't enough. An overleveled player can still wreck you if you don't know how to play your deck well. Therefore, the next aspect you really need to focus on is your playstyle. But before I explain about the playstyle, there is one super important thing which you should always remember. If you're facing an overleveled player in any trophy range, you can be 100% sure that you are more skilled than them. If you're at the same trophy range as overleveled players, then you can definitely consider yourselves skilled to some extent. You need to know that almost all overleveled players are extremely bad at the game. So to beat those players, you need to outskill them. And that's where your playstyle comes in. Patience is the key to beating overleveled players. Remember that because they are quite bad at the game, oftentimes they will make a bad mistake during the match. And that's when you need to go in. Defend effectively and wait for their misplay. Once it happens, punish them brutally through a punish card like Hog Rider or a Prince. Your game plan should always be to defend first and then build a counter-attack. When your opponent pushes a heavy troop, wait for them to make a mistake or for your defense to settle. Good card placements can turn a weak defense into a strong one. Always place your troops in positions where they can target multiple enemy units and not offer spell value to the opponent. Once you're able to counter their attack, use your surviving troops to launch a counter-attack. Also, try to predict what your opponent is likely to play. Overleveled players might be overconfident and they attack in a very predictable way. By anticipating their moves, you can prepare the right counters and force them to make errors. For example, you notice your opponent is constantly sending a Hog Rider and a Fireball together at your defensive building every time. So, instead of placing your building in the middle every time, you can place it in such a way that it avoids the Fireball while also pulling the Hog Rider. Another thing you can do is to not use your building at all and counter the Hog Rider using a normal troop like Mini P.E.K.K.A. If your opponent uses the same combo again, then they'll be behind on Elixir by a lot. That will be your chance to build a counter push and punish them. This is a really great move if you want to outsmart your opponents. You know what's another great move? To like and subscribe to the channel. One of the most important things in Midladder is managing your Elixir well. Do not spend too much at once, especially if you know your opponent's cards are overleveled. Instead, try to make sure that you always have enough Elixir reserved to counter any sudden heavy push. Effective Elixir management will allow you to defend better and launch your counterattacks more effectively. Utilize cards which actually provide you Elixir advantages. Therefore, using the best cards, which I'm revealing further on, will give you an upper hand against your opponent. But wait, let's say you did everything I've mentioned so far. Well, it's still highly unlikely that you will beat an overleveled opponent. The reason? Because if you make even a single mistake throughout throughout the match, you are done. Therefore, you need to make sure that you aren't making any mistakes with your gameplay. Some of the most common mistakes underleveled players make are they often overcommit Elixir. Players often spend way too much Elixir on offense. This leads them to having no Elixir to defend the enemy's counter push. For example, the match has just begun and you drop your giant plus prince on the bridge. Your opponent counters it with a skeleton army. Now, you've spent 10 Elixir while having 0 for defense. Your opponent is +7 on Elixir advantage and can easily punish you in the opposite lane. Therefore, being overly aggressive will result in you losing the match. Only spend as much Elixir as is necessary on offense. Defense should always be your #1 priority. They are bad with placements. You can't win a game if your card placements are horrible. Underleveled players often give too much spell value to their opponents by placing their cards too close to each other. Consider this scenario. You have a Hog Rider push coming your way, and you place your Musketeer and Cannon close to each other. Now, your opponent can take both of them out by a Fireball. Avoid doing that at all costs. Space out your cards to avoid giving them a positive Elixir trade. They attack too early. Against an overleveled opponent, you need to slow things down early in the match. Single Elixir is when you will have the most trouble defending, so you need to save your Elixir for that. Don't waste it too much on attacking. Overleveled cards can easily defend your small pushes, and you can't really build massive offense in single Elixir. Remember, a P.E.K.K.A. Battle Ram dual lane push with Bandit and Royal Ghost is much harder to defend than just a Battle Ram and Bandit push. They usually over-defend. Panicking and over-defending a push will only make things worse for you. You just need to remain calm and place your cards well. Also, sometimes you need to recognize when to let your tower go and fully focus on taking your opponent's tower instead. Consider this scenario. Your tower is in the opponent's spell range and time is ticking. So, if your opponent sends a troop to take down your tower, instead of defending it, you need to ignore it and focus on taking their tower. To reduce your chances of making mistakes, you need to practice a lot. The more you play, the more you learn about your opponent's tactics and your own deck's strengths and weaknesses. After each game, take a few minutes to watch the replay. Look for moments where you could have defended better or counterattacked more efficiently. Over time, these small improvements add up. One key thing to remember is that Clash Royale is always evolving with balance changes and new cards. Keep an eye on the latest updates and adjust your deck if needed. Now, let's get into the top 10 cards to deal against overlevel opponents. At number 10, we have the Phoenix. This 5 Elixir card is extremely spell resistant because of its respawn mechanic. Your opponent's overleveled spells are useless against the Phoenix because it can always respawn after a few seconds. At number 9 comes the Hog Rider. The Hog Rider is perhaps one of the best win conditions for Midladder considering how fast he is. Even a single hit from the Hog Rider deals high damage, making him the perfect punishing card against overleveled opponents. At number 8, we have the Sparky. Let me tell you, bad players always choke against the Sparky. It's great to counter tanks even if they're overleveled. Unless your opponent is carrying a rocket in their deck, your Sparky can always provide value against higher level players. Zap comes in at number 7. Midladder is filled with swarm units, therefore Zap should be preferred over any other spell because of its ability to deal instant damage. Its utility against popular mid-ladder cards make it a must-have in your deck. Making her way at number 6, we have the Valkyrie. Valkyrie is great to deal against those annoying Mega Knights and Elite Barbarians. She works best especially against players who are reckless and spam all their cards at the bridge, but make sure to always pair her with another damage-dealing troop. At number 5, Skeleton Army is also one of the best cards to use in your deck. It can counter punishing cards like Prince, Hog Rider, or Elite Barbarians. All you need to make sure is that you bait out the small spell of your opponent beforehand. Coming in at number 4, we have the Tornado. Perhaps it's the only card that works better when it's actually underleveled. The reason? Well, if it's one level less, it can activate your King Tower against Graveyard. This ability of the Tornado makes it a game changer. Additionally, Tornado is great on both offense and defense. Ranked 3rd as the best mid-ladder building, we have the Goblin Cage. The cage is incredibly valuable since it provides immense value on defense. It can take critical hits from heavy damage-dealing troops, and when it pops, The Goblin Brawler gives you a great counter push as well. At number 2, we have the Princess. The Princess is an extremely versatile card. Overleveled players find it annoying because it's really hard to kill. Playing the Princess at bridge will force your opponents to commit a lot of elixir, which can turn the tide in your favor. Finally, as the best card to deal against overleveled opponents, enter Inferno Dragon. This card is a must-have in your deck because it can single-handedly win you games. Despite being underleveled, it can melt an opponent's troop like Mega Knight or Golem in an instant. Bonus tip: choosing the perfect win condition is really necessary to deal against overleveled opponents. If you want to master your own win condition or you want to try a new one, then definitely click on this video.